Hello, everybody. This is Mike Van Meter, and welcome to the Recovery is Possible podcast. And I want to thank you for joining me, and you can reach us at our Facebook site, which is also called Recovery is Possible, or our website, which is VanMeterWellnessSolutions.com. And this podcast exists to educate the public about addiction, remove the stigma associated with addiction, and offer help and support to those suffering from addiction. This episode is sponsored by FHE Health, a substance abuse and mental health treatment center specializing in treatment for first responders' needs, including PTSD, anxiety, and substance use. So take the first steps to a better life today by visiting FHEHealth.com. That's FHEHealth.com. And so today, folks, I wanted to introduce you to a new friend of mine that I met, Andrew Pierce, who is an addiction therapist, and he has worked in the past in intensive outpatient programs. And as you know, I've done a separate podcast on what an IOP is. And he's also done individual therapy and aftercare. And what's most exciting about this is he just recently released a book in June, and it's called Resolving Spiritual Issues in Recovery. And the subtitle is Putting the Universe to Work for You. And how we came across one another is I've talked about this on the podcast before, how I'm working on another graduate degree through the Hazelden Betty Ford Foundation, and my degree is in addictions and co-occurring disorders. And Andrew is a graduate of this program back in 2017, so we have a lot in common. We have some mutual friends that put us in contact, and here we are today, and had a discussion with Andrew last week about spiritual issues, and I thought it was interesting, and I know that he has a lot of fantastic information that he's going to pass on to you folks, and I know you're going to enjoy this podcast and get a lot out of it. So with that, Andrew, thank you for coming on the program.
Hey, Mike, thanks for having me. I'll give you a quick correction. It's resolving spiritual skepticism in recovery.
Resolving spiritual skepticism.
Spiritual skepticism, yeah,
in recovery.
And I run into that a lot because it's hard for me to remember. People say, "What's the name of your book?" And I literally have to stop and think. But that's
You have to think about your own name of your own book.
No, I do,
right?
seriously. It's like, what's it called? It's like, oh yeah. I worked on it so much. I'm so close to the material. It's like the name it doesn't even matter anymore.
Well, it sounds good. Well, tell us a bit about it, and tell us a little bit about yourself as well.
Sure. Well, I'm a person in long-term recovery, which for me means that starting in I guess April 26th to be specific of 2014, I haven't had a alcohol or any drugs, and the benefits of that have been that I've been able to, I guess, maximize my potential, come closer to realizing what my potential truly is. I went to grad school, as you are, at probably the best addiction counseling program in the world. People come there from all over the world. I got, a 3.85 grade point, which is pretty good for somebody that got through undergrad with D minuses. And I run a thriving practice here in Southwest Florida in Naples, and it's every day is an adventure, and I love what I do.
Well, can you talk to a little bit about how did you get to this point, and why did you choose this degree? And I know a lot of people that come into this degree program are people that are in recovery themselves. That's my case, and I decided that after I retired from my career that this is the kind of work that I wanted to do full time, and went out to get formally educated on that, and then ultimately licensed. Is that kind of the path that you took?
Oh, definitely. The first, I've always been in finance, pretty much most of my adult career. After college, I was, I should take that back. Probably the last, 15 or 20 years leading up to the time that I got sober, I was in finance. But somebody accused me of having sort of a Forrest Gump type life. In the 80s, I did the long hair music scene on the Sunset Strip, playing with guys like Poison and Warrant, and that was when the big hair days were going on in the mid 80s. I worked for the airlines, which I loved doing. When I was a kid, I wanted to be a pilot, and I still like work. I still like the airlines. I think that if I could have made a decent living at it, I would have probably been worked for the airlines because I love travel and adventure. And but when it came to getting into this line of work, when I got sober, the first couple of years were pretty tough. I mean, I was not one that was tended to want to reach out to other people. I was self-reliant. I was always entrepreneurial in nature. I ran a couple of music magazines. I had always done things myself. I'd always been my own boss. And so, when it came time to recovery, which for better or for worse requires a certain amount of interdependence, I struggled early on. And so I did get accepted to the grad school, and it probably saved my life. Being in this line of work gives me the depth of human connection that I believe is necessary for a really strong, recovery.
Yeah, it really is. It really is. And so what kind of, how long have you been sober?
Oh, let's see, a little over 7 years. Yep, at the end of April 26, 2014. So it's a little over 7 years that I've been sober. Now, mind you, I was sober for a period of time from age 17 to age 30. I got in some legal trouble when I was a kid, and the judge gave me a choice between going to prison for 3 years for auto theft and taking stolen firearms across state lines, or I could go to treatment. So I thought about it for half a second and said, well, I guess I'll go to treatment. And I did go to treatment and stayed sober for 13 years until my 30th birthday, when I gave myself permission to have a nice glass of wine because I got complacent in my recovery.
Yeah, that's kind of the beginning of the end, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I had an 18-year run after that, and I left a substantial trail of mayhem behind me as a result.
Yeah, I've talked about that before in this podcast, that it's the first drink that kills you. It's not, it's one too many and 100's not enough. And it just really re-triggers that progression of the addiction, doesn't it?
Oh, it certainly does. And what I tell folks when people say, "Well, how do you stay sober? What's the number one tool that you use now?" And it's just something that I tell myself. I could put it on a bumper sticker, and is that I know where that train goes.
Mm-hmm.
If I have that one drink, I'm going to be all in, because why not?
Mm-hmm. And we're personalities of extremes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and that's very, very common in people with addictions. And something I've noticed, and I haven't read literature on this. It's just something that I've noticed. Just sort of being an observer of human nature, that there's a lot of artists. Now, it's funny that you mentioned that you're a musician, and you're very involved in the music industry. And what a lot of people don't know about me is I actually have a very strong musical background myself. Actually toyed with going into the music industry after high school. And I have noticed that a lot of people that are in recovery are in the arts and in writing, academia, things like that. It seems to be, people who are very creative and people who really try to excel and go to great lengths to excel. And I think that's just part of our personality and our makeup.
Yeah, I think we're highly driven, especially toward when there are unlimited upside prospects. As a musician, if you write a good song and it catches on, poof, instantly you don't have to worry about working anymore. You get a nice royalty check, regularly. So there's always that element of excitement, I think, dealing with the arts, regardless of whether it's painting or songwriting or what have you. And plus, it's fun. A lot of people in recovery, if you think about it, have have low self-esteem, right? And so the adoration and validation, the external validation that we get, feels so good when you're on stage, that it's highly addictive.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it is. And so when people get into recovery, that's something to be aware of, isn't it? That, a lot of times people get into the recovery from the physical substance, the chemical substances, and then gravitate towards becoming addictive to other things, whether it's love, whether it's gambling, whether it's pornography, the process addictions. Food actually can be, too much, too little. Exercise can become an addiction. And we just transfer that personality. So it's a basic personality type as well. But we can become addicted really to anything.
Well, yeah, and it's odd that you mentioned that, but when I first when I quit using between ages 17 and 30, during that time, I still had other unbeknownst to me because I didn't know about these things. I basically switched to relationships, and I probably had, looking back, I had like 25 affairs on my first wife before I lost count. And so, yeah, I was in recovery from substances and alcohol, but it simply shifted. It's like whack-a-mole, right? You get one thing and it pops up in another area unless we really get our head around it. And when I quit 7 years ago, over the course of the next couple of years, I gained 75 pounds before I finally got a handle on that, right? And so, without somebody who understands how these things work, and that's why aftercare, for instance, is so important when somebody goes to treatment. If they don't have somebody to help them navigate how this addiction can pop up in other areas, gambling, shopping, pornography, you name it, they're still going to have trouble attaining what I consider to be the end game. The opposite of addiction isn't abstinence. The opposite of addiction is the ability to engage in healthy relationships. And whether it's process addictions, all addictions interfere with that because it involves shame and dishonesty and the need to hide the behaviors. But in the end, the only place that love resides is in the context of healthy relationships. And so addiction is addiction. And as long as a person is vulnerable to their addictions and engaging in them, they're not going to be, I guess, what I would call a safe person to love. That's the end game. Mm-hmm. So all of the pathologies, once we get abstinent, abstinence is about 15% of the way along that continuum between active addiction and the ability to engage in healthy relationships. But it's only an abstinence where, for instance, we have one of the minimum requirements for healthy relationships is we have to have accurate access to our emotions so that we can actually relate with people on an emotional level accurately. That's the very least that we need. But while we're sober also, then we can do all the other work, the other 85% of the work that needs to be done usually to fully restore our ability to engage in healthy relationships, such as dealing with the shame, dealing with family of origin stuff, dealing with learning what healthy relational dynamics looks like, establishing healthy boundaries, people pleasing, all these different pathologies that come along with addiction that either preceded it or came afterward or both. They have to be really resolved in order for us to be able to engage in healthy relationships.
That's why I never understood when I first went to treatment, and they handed me the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous, and at first I thought, okay, well, this is going to be the blueprint. This is like the user's manual on how to get sober. And when I read the big book, I didn't see a whole lot about drinking or not drinking. It was all about, taking an inventory, filling that spiritual void, turning, powerlessness, turning my life over to a power greater than myself, taking those inventories, making lists of amends. And I didn't understand that at first. I didn't understand the correlation between behavior and relationships, because there's a lot about how we relate to others in the big book and the other 12-step programs too. It's not just AA. And I did not understand that at first. And then I thought, oh, well, they're just trying to backdoor me into religion here. That's what it really sounds like. But I wasn't really in a state at that time to completely grasp what this was all about. I just thought it was you're going to teach me to stop drinking, period. That's it. There's some secret code that I need to stop drinking, and when are you guys going to give me the secret code? But there is no secret code, is there? It's more of like a lifestyle, and that feeling, and we'll get into this in your book here, where we talk about the spiritual aspect of this. But what were your thoughts when you first came to recovery? Was it similar to mine?
Well, yes. I mean, I went, the 12-step route because that was the most readily accessible. And I think there's no question that the 12-step based programs have worked for tens of millions of people. And so my attitude was just try and kind of like wildebeest, right? Stay in the middle of the pack, and I probably won't get picked off by the lions. And so I tried to do the best I could to do that, and to the extent that I did, I was successful. I looked at the principles. I did have a problem with the spiritual aspects, this idea of a higher power and God. I remember in the 90s, for instance, because in the 90s I was sober, right? But I was still having this, relationship type of addiction going on. And I was married, and I kind of I thought I was just a sociopath because I didn't have the understanding that I have now about, mental health and addiction. But to the casual observer, my behavior was sociopathic. I was doing whatever I wanted to, very narcissistic, doing what I wanted to without regard for the emotional consequences to anybody else. Of course, I also had to lie a lot, right? Because I wasn't going to let my shameful behavior out. And so that, of course, undermined my self-esteem, because self-esteem is all about asserting who we are authentically, having the courage to let the chips fall where they may. But I could never do that, because who would want somebody that is so tied up, addicted to their, behaviors, pleasurable things? And so I even joined the Promise Keepers in the 90s. I remember the Million Man March and that sort of thing. I figured, well, a higher power, that's the ticket. If I just get religion, that'll save me, and my behavior will change, and I'll be lovable again. And didn't work. Worked for a lot of the other guys, because a lot of them didn't have addictions, right? They were able to, leverage their spiritual beliefs to change their behaviors. And so I developed a certain amount of contempt, because, and also that experience in my mind reaffirmed how unworthy of salvation, I guess you could say, that I was. Otherwise, it would have happened. And it didn't do a lot for me in terms of my belief in the powerfulness of a higher power. So either that higher power didn't care, or didn't exist, or I wasn't worthy, or any number of other valid conclusions one might come to when faced with a similar situation. And so, when I got into recovery this time around after my 18-year run, I remember actually going into Betty Ford the first day, and when I woke up, there was a little goodie bag next to the bed. It had the copy of the Big Book and the 12 by 12, the 12 traditions of Alcoholics
12
Anonymous.
steps and 12 traditions.
12 steps and 12 traditions, yeah. And I literally looked at them. I'm like, if this is all you got, then I might as well leave. And I started to leave. And I was on my way out. I'd packed my stuff, and this guy, Jimmy Weiss, who we're friends now, he came hustling out. I guess I'm not the only person that ever got to treatment and decided that maybe it wasn't the best idea the first day. He was basically a client retention specialist, and he came hustling across. I read this in my book, but it's worth repeating. He came hustling across the green area and said, "Come on in my office for a minute." And he said, "Well, what's going on?" And I told him, I said, if I got this Big Book and this 12 by 12, and if this is the best you got, then you're wasting your time. I'm just going to go back and go about my business. And he said, "Hang on a minute." And he went in the other room, and I heard him talking on the phone. He handed me his cell phone, and I thought maybe it was my wife or something like that. And I put up the phone, and I said, "Yeah, hello." "Hey, man, this is Steven Tyler, man. What's going on? I've been in your spot before. I was sitting there not too long ago. What was your thing, And I told him, it was coke and drinking and all sorts of stuff. He said, "Oh, man, that's terrible. But listen, just tell you what, your money's not going to be here for a few days. Instead of taking off, why don't you just stick around for a couple of days till you get the resources to leave, and just do me a favor, man. Just be honest as you can, just say whatever you think, no matter what you think anyone's going to." And as a musician, of course, Jimmy knew that I would probably respond to a guy like Steven Tyler, who was one of my, idols, coming up in the day. And I'm like, okay. So I agreed anyway that for 3 days I'd stick around because I had requested some money from my stockbroker. I'd have some stocks liquidated. It takes 3 days for the money to clear. And then otherwise I was just going to have to pawn my watch, literally walk into town in Palm Springs, which was my plan, and get a train ticket and live with my girlfriend. That's another story. But I did it, and I was honest. By the way, I guess Stephen had taken that call at 4 a.m. He was in Japan or something touring.
Really?
And so,
wow.
yeah, and so one thing that said first of all was that A, Jimmy was smart. B, but somebody that I don't even know cared about me and thought I was worth at least taking a few minutes to talk to. But number three, when I did what Stephen said, I was brutally honest to everybody, and I think my plan was to be as honest, super honest and negative, and say how I felt, so that they would say, "Oh yeah, this guy sucks. Let's get out of here." And none of the staff left. It was a revelation that I could be authentic and still be accepted, and so that was a big turning point for me, at least, for sticking around. But as far as the spiritual stuff is concerned. After I got out, I could see that intuitively I could see that people that had some sense of spirituality or devoutness had an easier time of it, I think, at staying sober, because I think if you think about it, the addiction itself it's a stress response, right? And so if you have this set of beliefs that give you the sense that everything's going to be okay, that it takes away a lot of fuel for the desire to self-medicate for people, and I simply couldn't do that for any number of, again, valid reasons and experiences that I had leading up to that point. And so I became fascinated with a book about 2 years ago by a guy, Joe Dispenza, who spent a lot of time studying placebo effect on people. And I thought about, placebos work because the belief, right, that something is going on that isn't. In other words, it doesn't matter if it truly is or isn't. It's just that we believe that it's going on. And I thought, there's a big correlation between spirituality, if you will, and this placebo thing. And so I started digging in to, physics and the nature of reality, and how, because I could relate to science and philosophy and physics because I like those sorts of things. And it turns out that the more I looked at the nature of reality, the more I realized that there's a lot of evidence as we start getting toward the edge of our understanding that maybe there is a plausible argument in favor of some sort of divine intelligence or higher power. And I kind of lay that out in the book. And then I put it into practice, the beliefs that would be used to leverage that reality. And it started working, which only just reinforced my faith to the point where I feel pretty confident, at least for myself, that I'm far less skeptical about the notion of adopting a sense of spirituality to the extent that it makes sense for me.
Well, and I know you run into the same thing that I do in the counseling field, and that is that if there's one thing I know that I'm going to run into, if there's going to be a battle, if there's going to be sort of a stumbling point, if you will, when people first come into recovery, is that whole notion of spirituality when they come in, because just about all of the programs out there deal with this in one form or another. And it's a stumbling block in the beginning. And I think people confuse religion with spirituality. Maybe elaborate on that a little bit. What would be the difference in your mind between the difference between religion and spirituality?
Well, one of the things that I've found is that I think, religion, I think, sort of seems to have an agenda in my mind. I hate to sound cynical, but I've found that it seems like it's people trading on this idea of immortality. I find it makes me a little bit cynical. And so whether it's, I lived in Utah for a while, I got my undergraduate degree at University of Utah. And I remember having a field day, of course, with that whole deal, because in order to participate in the predominant religion there, you were required to give 10% of your income away. It's almost like taxes, right? And for some reason, it was almost like a conflict of interest, right? It's like, there's all this grace to be had for free, but here, we'll take 10% anyway, right? And that's somehow it certainly appealed to my sense of cynicism. People have a lot of different reasons for being skeptical about religion in general. For instance, when we're kids growing up, let's say you went to church, standard Western Christian church. And a lot of people grew up in dysfunctional families. And when you're a kid, your self-perception is primarily based on how you perceive that your parents or your caregivers perceive you. And so if they were alcoholic or rageaholics or workaholics, right, we got this marginalized perspective of ourselves. And then we go to church and we just basically view God as a supersized version of our parents and make the appropriate conclusions on that. If I can't even trust my parents to love me, there's a kid, they don't go through this conscious process. It's just unconscious. As a child, who's more godlike than our parents? And so if our parents their love is conditional, we infer that God's love is conditional, or that we're not worthy of it, so we don't even ask. We just presume that we're not worthy. If my parents could forsake me, then why wouldn't an all-important God? Mm-hmm. Or a cynic would simply infer that if God cared about them, he wouldn't allow dysfunction to occur, whether it's in their parents or themselves. The end result is distrust in a higher power. In addiction, physiologically, with damage to the insular cortex, one of the symptoms is misplaced distrust of benevolent people and misplaced trust of the untrustworthy. And so people with physiological damage in their certain parts of their brain will naturally distrust a higher power. They're certainly not going to blindly trust a benevolent entity. Shame fosters spiritual skepticism. The fact that we feel like we don't deserve it. We've been repressing our true self for so long that we don't even believe we're worthy of human consideration, much less divine consideration. So judgment is part of most religions. There's certain behavioral requirements that are important for membership, and as people who are by definition unable to guarantee their behavior, it doesn't seem like religion would be a good fit. And so there are so many constraints and reasons why religion is not necessarily tenable for somebody that's in early recovery. Certainly, that's why so many people just have a problem with the second and third step. Turning our will and our lives over to the care of some higher power that we either don't trust or feel we're worthy of. It's a big stretch.
Yeah, and that's I run into that with a lot of people as well, and I've often thought of it as sort of like the horizontal and the vertical. The horizontal portion being religion, because the first thing people will say is, I had a bad experience I was raised in this particular religion, and I didn't like it, or I was molested by somebody in that religion, or somebody I know was, or they ran off with the money, or so-and-so had an affair. And people get really hung up on the people aspect of it, the organized religion, which is made up of people. And in early recovery, what we try to do is not discuss that and not worry about that, but focus on the relationship between the person and that higher power. Now, the higher power doesn't have to be an entity. It can be the group. It can be a family. It can be a lot of things, can't it?
Oh yeah, for sure. For me, I think from the most practical perspective, I chose the group, as a higher power, and there's in my research, I found out that there's actually a clinical benefit to that too, because that has I should say it helps explain why that makes it possible for people to more plausibly grasp a group as being a higher power as opposed to some invisible being or themselves. The anterior cingulate cortex is one of the parts of the brain that's usually affected by addiction. It's responsible for our ability to self-assess and to connect the dots between our behaviors and the consequences. And so in a group of people, we're perfectly able to assess other people's decision processes, but our own is impaired. I use the example in the book of going to Key West. If I were sitting with you and we're new in recovery and I thought of the brilliant idea, I said, I think I'm going to go down to Key West this weekend and watch the sunset on the beach and drink a Diet Coke and watch people go by. That's a terrible idea for somebody in recovery because Key West is not a sober-friendly destination if you've ever been there and remember it, right? And so hopefully the person sitting across from me who has just as little recovery as I have would be able to say, that's really stupid, Andrew. Why don't you either not do that and we'll hang out here and do something, or at least bring your sober posse with you and we can keep each other accountable. So in a group, we're kind of using everybody else's anterior cingulate cortices, if you will, to help us navigate our processes. It works. Again, we're perfectly capable of assessing other people, but our ability to self-assess is severely impaired for the first year or two.
Yeah. Oh no.
So it makes
agree.
sense to let the group be a higher power.
Yep. Yeah. I completely. That's very, very well said. I think that's probably the strongest argument I've heard for the group, particularly early on. Now, I've often postulated that later in recovery, you will just sort of naturally gravitate towards, this higher power, this spiritual aspect of recovery. Because people who get into long-term recovery, and I am definitely one of those people, you start to look back and you realize, wow, I've got all this time sober now, and so few people actually get to that point. I mean, when you think about it, it's more likely that people are not going to get into long-term recovery than are going to get into long-term recovery. And you think, well, how is it that I made it this far and others didn't? And I know for me, it was undoubtedly the spiritual aspect. I really started to dig into that. And people that have long-term recovery explore that. Now, it's not all one path, and it's not all religion. It's everybody has sort of their own thoughts behind what their spiritual life is. But there's no question. What nearly all of them have in common is they developed that spiritual side of their life, whatever that means to them. Is that what you've seen as well?
Yes, I think that's true. And there are a couple of things there. First of all, I think the longevity is certainly helped by, adopting a spiritual perspective of some sort. But even more importantly, I think the depth and quality of recovery is greatly enhanced if you look at the promises. And, I would look at the 12 promises of AA, and I could see that they were all kind of happening to varying degrees. But when it finally kind of clicked and I was able to develop, I would say the more spiritual perspective I was able to internalize and develop, that it was to that degree that I was able to experience greater depth of the 12 promises coming into fruition. And it's when those promises come into fruition that is really going to dictate, I think, the prospects for longevity and a quality of recovery where we're actually happy being sober, not just skidding by the skin of our teeth, but that we actually have some real depth to our recovery process.
That's right. Now that's going to lead me into have a couple more questions for you, if you don't mind. But before we get to them, I just want to remind everybody again that this episode is sponsored by FHE Health, and FHE Health has been providing life-changing behavioral health services for more than 20 years. They treat substance abuse and mental health disorders in an individualized and comprehensive approach. Recognizing the specialized treatment needs of the first responder community, they've created Shatterproof, a dedicated program for law enforcement, fire rescue, and similar communities to receive treatment among peers. They're experienced in providing privacy and working with unions for employment. FHE Health is committed to providing the best care experience for our patients, for their families, and for our community. So learn more at fhehealth.com. So Andrew, when you've got your own practice going on now, correct?
Mm-hmm. Yep. I do.
What would you say is the biggest obstacle to getting people into recovery from your perspective? I talked about, in my experience, not being in private practice, but just sponsoring people and through internships and just, people I've worked with. To me, it is understanding the true disease nature of addiction. That's one. And then the other thing is this idea of getting past the higher power question, and then people starting to think that recovery groups are a cult and they don't want to be part of a cult. That's kind of what I've seen. But what about you? What have you seen with patients coming in?
Mm-hmm. Well, I see that, first of all, I think stigma is a big deal.
Mm-hmm.
They'll come in if they're externally motivated to come in. Oh, my wife told me to come in, or my work did, or the court or something refers them. Those are usually the most challenging situations because on some level nobody wakes up one day and says, "Oh, I think I'm going to go to treatment today." It just doesn't happen, right? Something there's some sort of precipitating event that led to their being there. But one of the biggest obstacles, I'll do an assessment with somebody and I'll tell them what I think, and then one of two things will happen. They'll say thanks and I'll never see them again, or they'll say thanks, I'll never see them again until about 6 months later when they've gone through more of the same stuff that I told them they were probably going to experience, and they realize that, okay, maybe there's some there, and they've tried to do do things their own way. But that when our apparatus for self-assessment is corrupted, and we only know what we know, and so but stigma is one of the things. A sense that that they can control this now that they know what's going on. Oh, well, now that I know it's a disease, then I can control my drinking, and so they have more research to do, shall we say, before they come to the conclusion that they in fact are powerless over their ability to guarantee their behavior.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with that. And the idea that because this idea of the stigma prevents people oftentimes from doing the things that they need to do in aftercare, and that's namely stay involved in some sort of a program in aftercare. And then it's, particularly if you're a small community, you think, okay, well, I can't go to meetings because I'm going to know people that are there. I know that's a big issue. Now, I live in a very large metropolitan area.
Going to a meeting, they're also de facto admitting that they're one of those people. Right?
Yeah, that's right.
And when it comes to, who am I going to see there, I always jokingly say, well, isn't that kind of like running into your priest at the strip club? I mean, neither one of you is going to say anything. Right?
Exactly. And I've often said to people, well, has it occurred to you that if they're at a meeting that you're at, they're likely there for the same reason that you're there. So, and by the way, that's happened to me. I don't know if that's ever happened to you, but that has happened to me. And, when that realization, wait a minute, I didn't, it's not like I was, intending to go to the garden section of Walmart and took a wrong turn and ended up in an AA meeting. That's not how it works. We were both there for a particular reason. So the book, what was the motivation behind you wanting to do the book? Because that's a very big undertaking. And so what was your thought process behind this? What motivated you to want to write a book and take on that sort of a commitment?
Well, the first thing I guess that got me going was this book started out as something else, and then it became its own thing. I had read a book by a guy named Joe Dispenza called Breaking the Habit of Being Yourself. And he was the one that talked about this placebo idea, right? And he lays it out pretty well. And I thought, wow, these are great ideas. I wonder if I could adapt this material to addiction, because most self-help books don't take into account the addictive personality and the tremendous amount of shame-based personality that comes with that. They can't even envision what a reality would look like where they're overriding emotion from the time they wake up in the morning to the time they go to sleep is gratitude. I mean, it's impossible for somebody that's been afflicted with addiction to imagine that. And so I wrote my book initially intended to be sort of like Breaking the Habit of Being Yourself, but for folks with addiction, or at least to get folks with addiction up to speed so that when they read his book, that they would be able to hit the ground running. So it was going to fill a gap. Then I started doing the research that, about quantum field theory and that sort of stuff, which his book is based on, or the basis for his change model. And again, I adapted that to put it in the context of addiction, because if you think about it, addiction, going from addiction from an addict to I guess less of an addict or somebody that's not using, is a change. And so I ultimately ended up basically turning his change model into an addiction change model, to the extent that the entire book outlines that. And then if a person goes through my book, they'll understand that next step, and they'll be able to move on to more, conventional changes, things if his change model was based on changing folks with physiological ailments. He could literally use beliefs based on reality, how the nature of reality is, to make physiological changes, to cure neurological diseases, to repair spinal stuff, and it had been proven to work. I thought, well, I don't need to repair anyone's spine so they can walk. I just need to change somebody so that, get them to believe in the possibility that they can change, first of all, right? Because that's one of the biggest challenges I have, is people that have been afflicted by addiction don't even believe that they could quit. And so using a field-based change model, which is, I guess, what I coined my change model, it overcomes spiritual skepticism. It overcomes people's learned helplessness, if you will. And it also overcomes the contempt for spirituality that people have by taking a science-based approach, using more of an Eastern philosophy where there aren't any conditions for engagement in the spiritual community. And so it really overcomes three of the most challenging problems that people in addiction, or therapists of people in addiction, are going to encounter. So it's a great resource not only for end users that are trying to change themselves, or to understand about how addiction works for loved ones, but it also is great for clinicians who want to use the model and the principles presented in the book to facilitate their clients' ability to change their beliefs, right? Placebo theory. Change their beliefs about themselves, what they're truly capable of. And this book does a really great job at that.
Yeah, and I would actually add one more thing in there. You said that a lot of addicts aren't sure whether they can change, but I think it even begins prior to that, and that is you truly need to want to change. And when I say you want to change, I mean you want to change, not want to change because I'm tired of the court being on me, or my wife is on my back, my husband's on my back. I want my kids back. I want my job back. That can't be the motivation, can it? It has to be something deep down internally.
Well, they have to be internally motivated. And the way that I do that is I kill two birds with one stone. I use a technique which is outlined in the book called the magic wand thought experiment. And I will tell the client who's sitting across from me in so many words, here's a magic wand, right? And I want you to write an essay basically describing a perfect world in which your reality is such that, as I mentioned earlier, when you wake up in the morning, from the time you wake up to the time you go to sleep, the overwhelming emotion tied with your day and your week and any given month is unbridled gratitude. And they look at me kind of quizzically, and I repeat it, and then next week they come back with this 2-paragraph terrible effort at that. But what it points out, and the response is, well, what happened? Did you not understand the assignment? Yeah. Well, I wanted to be realistic. right? And that's the point. And if you think about it, right, Richard Branson, right? The difference between you and me or Richard Branson or anybody is literally what we believe we're capable of. Because if we have certain beliefs about ourselves, unquestioned beliefs, that's going to define what we're willing to do and what our possible behaviors are going to be like. If we truly believe that we can't become somebody that doesn't have substances in their life, then that's probably not going to happen. And so the magic wand thought experiment, in addition to revealing pathology and clients about what their limiting beliefs are, it gives us fertile ground for exploring why they believe that way. And we can talk about all sorts of things. But in the end, we keep at it, because if we have this filled out vision for what it feels like to be that person that wakes up in the morning and they're just happy and excited about the day, and they're doing things that are meaningful to them, whatever those things are, we define what those are. All of a sudden we have this bright beacon to plant on the horizon. Now we have a place to go, right? We have a direction to walk in. If we don't have that, if we don't have a vision for what we want, how are we going to be excited about leaving substances? And so, this exercise sets the stage for the therapy moving forward for quite a while. We have to decide what kind of values that kind of person would have to have in order to live that reality. And then we add the spiritual aspect, which is what part 2 of the book is about, how the universe works, if you will, and how when we have a congruent vision for what we truly want and our heads and our hearts are aligned, the universe does sort of start doing things for us that we can't do for ourselves. And it gets a little bit weird at that point. And I can't explain it, but to the extent that we're able to meditate on what we truly want, what that vision is, it's like putting out a radio signal into the universe, and we start see little synchronicities start showing up in our lives, and life becomes kind of effortless.
Well, what's funny is that most of the people in long-term recovery that I know have, maybe they don't articulate it the way that you just did, but they have, they understand that happens. They understand that by just showing up, doing the right thing, staying sober, always helping other people, being grateful for the things that they have, the recovery that they have, and the blessings. And I've had people in my world really express gratitude, even in the midst of horrific things happening in their lives, but still maintaining a sense of serenity. And, you see it. Like I often tell new people that I work with in recovery that when you look at someone and I ask them, tell me, is that person just not drinking or drugging, or are they sober? Because there is a difference. And they'll say, well, how do you know? How do you know if somebody's sober as opposed to just not using? And I'll say, you'll know it. When somebody is truly sober, which is a state of being, you know it. And I think that oftentimes they are reflecting a lot of the principles that you're talking about, and that's how you know it. It's just intuitive.
Mm-hmm. I think there's a certain authenticity, which is one of the important parts of recovery. There's one of the arguments, I guess, that I make to help people understand that how important it is for them to recover their authenticity, their true self, their inner child, whatever you want to call it, before they started to repress themselves at age 2 or 3 in order to maintain attachment to their parents, right? That's when they started losing themselves. And if they became people pleasers as a result of that, which probably 80% of my clientele is, they get to the point where, and I said this myself, and I meant it at the time, but it is funny, when I die, everyone else's life is going to flash before my eyes, and we become so caught up in being what everybody else thinks that the number one of the elements of happiness is recovering our true self. What do I want? And that goes to that internal motivation you were speaking of. People don't have a good chance of long-term recovery if they're doing it for somebody else. Part of this vision that I try to get people to describe in great detail is about who are they and what do they truly want. And if they don't know who they are, how do they even know what they want? That's one of the things that we have to overcome. And one of the best quotes I heard from somebody on authenticity was a lady who, Carolyn McHugh, who studied a lot of famous people, and she said, all the outstanding people the most outstanding people in the world have one thing in common: nothing. Right, and so so in other words, there's like a U-sized hole in the universe that only you can fill, and you can't fill it being somebody else, and you're surely never going to be happy being somebody other than who you are supposed to be. And inauthenticity and dishonesty about who we are has become so ingrained in our system because of social media, the need for external validation, and our own shame. We're afraid to assert our true self, because if we're rejected, it'll reaffirm what we already unconsciously believe to be true about ourselves, which is that we're not lovable, and that's just false. And so a lot of my early work with clients is practicing being authentic and having the experience of not being judged and rejected, which is quite a revelation to them because they've had to lie for so long in their mind. So ACA meetings are a great format for that.
Yeah, and well, for the audience, explain what an ACA meeting is.
It's short for Adult Children of Alcoholics and Dysfunctional Families. And so people that are candidates for ACA are people that are self-described people pleasers. They learned a long time ago that being their authentic self in childhood, in their family of origin, was not acceptable. And in chapter 1 of the book, I talk about the correlation between ADD and addiction. Physiologically speaking, ADD the symptomatic behaviors are a direct result of a shortage of dopamine D2 activity in the brain. And so, we do novelty seeking, risk taking behaviors, things like that. And of course, as a kid, if you have childhood ADD and your parents' mantra was children are to be seen and not heard, you can imagine that the kind of feedback that you're going to get through childhood, as long as it's not treated, is going to be pretty negative. And so that first time that you take a hit of your pot or a drink, the tremendous contrast between your baseline stress level and the relief that substance provides is going to be profound, and it's really going to set the stage for vulnerability to substance use issues moving forward. So, and not surprisingly, or perhaps surprisingly, also addiction. The physiological basis for addiction is a shortage, paucity of dopamine D2 activity in the brain, right? So 75 to 80% of my clients have either diagnosed or undiagnosed ADD, so there is a strong correlation between those two.
Wow. Interesting stuff. Yeah, that sounds like a fascinating book.
And the inauthenticity is all part of that. And so the book talks about how to overcome that. And the argument in favor of adopting spirituality goes way beyond just the addiction stuff, but because once you start to learn about the nature of reality and how we can actually move toward this idealized future version of ourselves much more quickly than we ever imagined, and become a lot happier along the way, I mean, it's really helping with recovery. And so that's what the book is all about.
Wow, that's really fascinating stuff. I can't wait to get a hold of this thing and read it. And I hope that hope our listeners do too. And let's see if I can get it right this time. Let's see if I can tell you the title of this book without screwing it up this time. Resolving Spiritual Skepticism in Reality, and the subtitle is
Recovery.
What's that?
Resolving Spiritual Skepticism in Recovery.
Mm-hmm. And then putting the universe to
work for you.
Yeah, that is fantastic. Now, how would the listeners get hold of you? You have a website, and
they can access me and the book through my website. It's quite simple. It's my name, AndrewGPierce.com, AndrewGPierce.com. We fulfill the book orders from the publisher that way, or people can get the book at Amazon or really any bookstore. If you ask for it by name, you can order it. There's a Kindle version that's downloadable from Amazon. If folks are doing the Barnes & Noble Nook thing, they can download it there. It's just it's a fantastic book. The feedback that I've gotten from it, it's all 5 stars so far on Amazon. the profound insights that people are gaining from it are really humbling. It really makes me feel good when people give the feedback on how it's affected them personally. It's a wonderful book. I love it.
And I would definitely, this subject matter, folks, if you're listening to this podcast and you're struggling with the spiritual aspect of recovery, please get hold of this book and read it, because I got to tell you, Andrew, this has been a fascinating discussion for me. I've learned a lot from what you've told me here today. And so this is really, really good stuff. And so I hope the listeners will get a copy of this book. So, Andrew, take us out. How about just one departing thought? What do you want our listeners to take away from your talk today with us? There's one just kind of key takeaway.
Mm-hmm. Oh boy. Well, I would say that spirituality is really a necessary aspect of a good quality of recovery, and that there are ways to adopt a sense of spirituality that are going to that my book outlines, that is going to make it's just going to change your life and the depth of your recovery by leaps and bounds in the 4 or 5 hours it takes to read it. There are links in the book. There's a media vault that I forgot to mention that's on the website. The address is in the book, with 40 different videos ranging from TED Talks to series that are accessible that correspond to each chapter. So not only is the book in itself a self-contained book, but there is supplemental media documentaries, videos, and things that you're referred to in the book to really increase your understanding of that. But if you're skeptical about spirituality and recovery, you are not alone. And this book helps to create a very plausible and palatable solution to those of us who intuitively know that spirituality is going to be beneficial to a quality long-term recovery and happiness in general.
Yeah, well, fantastic. Well, Andrew, thank you so much for coming on the podcast today, and I look forward to having you back again if you'd be willing to come back.
Oh, thanks, Mike. I'm happy to come back anytime. I'm easy to reach.
Oh, wow. Well, folks, thanks again, Andrew. And this episode has been sponsored by FHE Health, and according to SAMHSA, first responders are 30% more likely to develop behavioral health conditions like PTSD. FHE Health specializes in getting first responders better and cleared for duty, so find out more at FHEhealth.com. And folks, please, once again, reach out, get that book, take a look at it, either go to his website or go to Amazon and check out the book, Resolving Spiritual Skepticism in Recovery and Putting the Universe to Work for You, because it's a fascinating book, and I'm going to be checking it out here real soon. And folks, so as always, I'd like to say I don't represent any group. I do know that we talk about groups, so we've talked about several groups here tonight, but I don't, and Andrew don't represent any of these groups. We're talking about them because these are things that have worked for us, and maybe they'll work for you as well. So if I've said anything, or if Andrew said anything that doesn't apply to you or you don't agree with, then just discard it. But try to take information you can use for yourself and try to help others as well, because that's what we do in recovery. We help ourselves along the way, and we help to impart the knowledge we've gained to others as well. So with that, please visit our Facebook page, which is Recovery is Possible, and our website, VanMeterWellnessSolutions.com. And let me know how I'm doing, and let me know if there's a topic that you're interested in hearing about, because we do episodes on questions or answer questions that you guys have, answer those questions from the audience, because, I'd love to hear from you guys. So take care, and we'll talk with you next time.